she was crowned Queen of England. And 9 days later, she was a prisoner waiting to die. No coronation crowds cheering her name. No portrait hanging in a palace to remember her by. Just a 16-year-old girl, dragged into a crown she never wanted, used by powerful men who needed her blood. Not her voice. History barely whispers her name. But for 9 days, she was the most powerful woman in England. And then, they took it all away. This is the story of the girl who never wanted to be queen, and paid for it with her head. Stay with me till the end, because what happened to her in the Tower of London will chill you. To understand how Jane Grey ended up on a scaffold, we have to go back to where it all began. Jane was born in October 1537 into one of the most dangerous families in England. Why dangerous? Because her blood connected her directly to the Tudor throne. She was the great-granddaughter of King Henry VII, and in Tudor England, royal blood wasn't a blessing. It was a target. But Jane wasn't raised like most noble girls of her time. While other children her age were learning to dance and hunt, Jane was buried in books. She could read and write in Latin. She studied Greek. She corresponded with some of the greatest scholars in Europe. Here's something most people don't know. Jane once told a visiting scholar that she preferred reading Plato over hunting with her parents, but nobody was going to leave her alone. Because her family didn't see a scholar, they saw a bloodline, and bloodlines in Tudor England were currency. And that is where her story turns dark. King Henry VIII was dead. His son, Edward VI, sat on the throne. A boy king, crowned when he was just 9 years old, and by the time he turned 15, he was dying. Nobody knew for certain what illness was killing him, but everyone at court could see it. The boy king was fading fast, and he had no heir. Next in line was Edward's half-sister, Mary Tudor, a devout Catholic. And after decades of religious upheaval that terrified England's Protestant power players, so one man decided he wasn't going to let that happen. His name was John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Ruthless, calculating, and obsessed with control. Dudley needed a Protestant heir he could shape, and that's when his eyes landed on Jane Grey. He arranged a marriage between Jane and his own son, Guildford Dudley. Jane didn't want this marriage. She resisted. She pleaded against it. She was barely 16 years old, but her protests meant nothing. She was being married for a plan that would end with her being placed on the throne of England, whether she wanted it or not. July 1553. King Edward VI was dead. Before his death, Dudley had convinced the dying boy king to rewrite the rules of succession, cutting out his own sisters and naming Jane Grey as the next Queen of England. Jane knew nothing about this plan. Nothing at all. When messengers arrived to tell her the news, she collapsed. She wept. She refused the crown, reportedly insisting it belonged to Mary. But nobody in that room cared what Jane wanted. Her own parents, her father-in-law. They knelt before her and forced the truth upon her. She had no choice. On July the 10th, 1553, Jane Grey was taken by barge to the Tower of London, not as a prisoner, as a queen. And somewhere across the country, Mary Tudor had just heard the news too. She was not going to give up her crown without a fight. 9 days. That's all the time history gave her. Let's count them down. Day 1. Jane is proclaimed queen in London. But the crowds don't cheer. They stay silent. Something already feels wrong. Day 2 and 3. Jane realizes she isn't really in control of anything. Dudley makes every decision. Jane refuses to name her own husband as king, a small act of defiance in a situation where she has almost none. Day 4. Word arrives. Mary Tudor isn't fleeing. She's raising an army. Day 5 and 6. Panic spreads through London. Nobles quietly start switching sides. Day 7. Dudley marches out to confront Mary's forces himself. Day 8. The council left in London begins secretly meeting without Jane, preparing to abandon the queen they created. Day 9. The council publicly declares their support for Mary Tudor. Jane Grey is no longer queen. She finds out the same way she found out she became queen, from someone else deciding her fate for her. Again. 9 days. That's all it took to build a queen and destroy her. Within hours, everything changed. The Tower of London, her palace, became her prison. Same walls, same rooms, completely different reality. Mary Tudor rode into London in triumph. Church bells rang. Crowds that had stayed silent for Jane now cheered wildly for Mary. Dudley, the man who orchestrated this entire plan, was captured almost immediately. He begged for his life. He even converted back to Catholicism, hoping it might save him. It didn't. But here's the cruel irony. Jane never wanted any of this. She didn't plot. She didn't scheme. And yet, she was the one left holding the consequences. For now. Mary hesitated. Jane remained locked in the tower. Waiting. November 1553. Jane Grey is led into a courtroom that had already decided her fate. The charge, high treason. Jane pleaded guilty. She had been proclaimed queen. In the eyes of the law, that was treason, whether she wanted the crown or not. The sentence, death. Jane accepted her fate with a composure that stunned everyone who witnessed it. Still only 16 years old. But here's what most people don't know. Mary Tudor didn't want to execute her. For weeks, the execution was delayed. There was a real possibility Jane might be quietly pardoned. Then, in January 1554, a rebellion broke out, led by Thomas Wyatt. And devastatingly for Jane, her own father joined the uprising. Jane wasn't just a symbol of a failed plot anymore. She was a living threat. Mary's hesitation vanished. The date was set. Jane Grey would die. February the 12th, 1554. The Tower of London. Before her own execution, Jane was forced to watch her husband, Guilford Dudley, led out to be executed first. Some accounts say she watched his body brought back in a cart before her own walk to the scaffold. Then it was her turn. Witnesses described her as calm, dignified. She climbed the scaffold steps herself, without hesitation. Jane gave a final speech. She admitted to the act of treason, though not the intent. She asked those present to bear witness she died a good Christian woman. She recited Psalm 51, her voice steady. Then came the moment that still haunts historians today. Jane was blindfolded before kneeling at the block, and in that darkness, she couldn't find it. She reached out, feeling for the block, growing more desperate with every second. A frightened girl, alone, unable to see. Someone from the small crowd finally stepped forward and gently guided her hands to the block. Jane spoke her final words. "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." And then, it was over. She was 16 years old. 16 years old. Queen for 9 days. Remembered for over 470 years. Jane Grey never wanted power. She never asked for a crown. And yet today, she's remembered more vividly than queens who ruled for decades. Why? Because Jane represents something history rarely shows us so clearly. Innocence, caught in the machinery of other people's ambition. History remembers her as the 9 Days Queen. But strip away the title, and what's left is simple. A girl who just wanted to be left alone with her books. So here's a question worth sitting with. If Jane Grey had been born into an ordinary family, no royal blood, no ambitious men circling her like vultures, do you think she would have lived a long, quiet life exactly the way she wanted? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Jane Grey's story is just one piece of a much bigger picture. What it truly meant to be a woman in medieval and Tudor life. Powerless, even with a crown on your head. If this story moved you the way it moved me, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next one.